Shalom, I'm Rabbi Michael Panitz, speaking to you from the pulpit of Temple Israel of Norfolk, Virginia. And my topic at this time is called Tell the Truth. On April 24th, a few days ago, President Biden belatedly redressed a long-standing moral failing of our country. He recognized that the Armenians had suffered genocide at the hands of the Ottoman Turks in 1915. It's important for us to understand the history of what happened in order to be able to evaluate what it ought to mean to us today. So let me take you back to 1914 and 1915, and then we will better appreciate the contemporary echoes of those tragic events. We should remember that the Ottoman Empire was a Muslim country with a 7 centuries long history of waging religious war on non-Muslim states, or as they called them, infidels. Indeed, the Ottoman Empire viewed itself as the preeminent Muslim state in the world, and therefore as the party responsible for jihad, or holy war. For the Ottomans, the First World War was not only a secular conflict among modern nations, as it might have been understood by the Western belligerents. No, for them it was a jihad, a religious fight. On November 11th, 1914, 2 weeks after the Ottoman Empire entered the war on the side of the Germans and the Austrians against the British, French, and Russians, its top religious leaders proclaimed a jihad against those enemy armies. Jihad, as we should recall, is a term that has been reinterpreted in some quarters today, but in its classical sense, and certainly the way it was understood in 1914, was a Muslim parallel of crusade. It was thought to be a holy war. In the early months of the war, the Ottomans advanced in the Caucasus, seeking to conquer Baku, but they were badly defeated in early 1915. Looking for a scapegoat on whom to blame their defeat, they focused on the Armenian population of the war zone. That population was Christian. And for the Ottoman government, that automatically made them suspect as a fifth column in a war that the Ottomans had framed as a jihad. In truth, Armenians had already suffered from Turkish massacres in the 20 years before the outbreak of World War I in the Middle East. So it is not surprising that some Armenians hailed the Russians as liberators and assisted them. But the Ottoman reprisals went far beyond apprehending Armenians who had taken up arms against them. Under the cover of war, the Ottoman government initiated a far-reaching plan of what today we call ethnic cleansing, committing mass murders of Armenians in the eastern part of the province of Anatolia, and subjecting women, children, and old men to what amounted to death marches to inhospitable desert areas. The goal of the government in undertaking this barbarous campaign was to reduce the Armenian percentage of population in Anatolia to under 10% in any given region, and even under 2% in areas deemed militarily sensitive. Historians who have conducted careful research have reached a broad consensus that the ethnic cleansing was decided at the highest levels of the Ottoman government, that it was carried out with broad local Turkish support, as well as central direction, and that it merits the description genocide. In the words of the U.S. Holocaust Museum, and I now quote, "Taking orders from the central government in Constantinople, regional officials implemented mass shootings and deportations assisted by local civilians. Ottoman military and security organs and their collaborators murdered the majority of Armenian men of fighting age, as well as thousands of women and children. During forced marches through the desert, convoys of surviving elderly men, women, and children were exposed to arbitrary attacks. Hundreds of thousands of Armenians died before reaching the designated holding camps. Many were killed or abducted. Others committed suicide, and vast numbers died of starvation, dehydration, exposure, or disease en route. While some civilians sought to assist the Armenian deportees, many more killed or tormented the people in the convoys. The CUP government, that is to say the Ottoman government, systematically used an emergency military situation to effect a long-term population policy aimed at strengthening Muslim Turkish elements in Anatolia at the expense of the Christian population. Now, how does the date of April 24th, the date of President Biden's declaration, figure in this? The Ottomans suspected that a British attack on Gallipoli was imminent in April of 1915. In fact, the landings of Australian and New Zealand troops began overnight, April 24th to 25th. In anticipation of that fighting, the Ottomans rounded up 240 Armenian intellectuals in the capital of Constantinople, deported them eastward, and executed them. Hence, Armenians regard April 24th as the beginning of the genocide against their people, and historians accept that date. In 1922, a revolution established the modern state of Turkey, 99 years ago. At any time in the past 99 years, its government could have acknowledged the truth with minimal loss of prestige by blaming the atrocities on the former Ottoman government. After all, under Kemal Atatürk, the father of modern Turkey, the state had reformulated itself as a modern and secular and religiously tolerant polity. But it refused to do so, largely because its arrogance was such that it could not tolerate criticism even of the former regime. Now, in recent years, the situation has grown only worse with the accession of an Islamist regime in Turkey. For decades, Americans have urged our own country's leadership to tell the truth about what happened to the Armenians in World War I. In 1981, President Reagan obliquely acknowledged the actual history, but did not commit our country wholeheartedly to facing that truth. And subsequent presidents have dodged the mandate to have an honest reckoning. Most recently, Congress passed a resolution in 2019 recognizing and deploring the genocide against Armenians, and President Trump simply ignored that. Why were we so pusillanimous? Well, we were worried about straining relations with Turkey, a NATO ally. But in truth, Turkey has used the threat of downgrading its military cooperation with us repeatedly. And basically, it is trying to use that threat to hold us hostage. Even so, Turkey is already improving its military ties with Russia and its economic ties with China. It is hardly behaving as a country that wants good relations with us. So now, America has dared to tell the truth in the moral realm. And now it is time for Israel to do the same. Israel has always worried about losing a valuable ally in Turkey, or at least a non-enemy. But the Turkish leader Erdogan has degraded the value of that. His anti-Israeli rhetoric and action ought to wake up Israelis from the pipe dream of appeasing him and thus buying his friendship. I am with those in Israel who say that as the country more aware of the evils of genocide than any other country in the world, Israel needs to choose moral clarity on this issue. There's a famous rabbinic story. God is presiding over a debate among the angels about whether humans ought to be created. The angels divide into camps. Truth and peace are opposed to the creation of the human, because the human will be a liar and a warmongerer. On the other hand, the angels' justice and loving kindness argue that the human ought to be created. God took truth and banished him from the council, sending him down to the earth. And then God created humans. But all the angels, according to the story, put aside their debate at that point and said to God, "Let truth spring up from the earth." I would say the same. Let truth spring up from the ground, from the graves of the hundreds of thousands of Armenians murdered in the genocide of 1915. Let truth spring up from the ground of the desert where Armenians died of exposure and dehydration. Let truth spring up from the ground. Let truth spring up, because the truth will set you free. Amen.